this shir tonight, we are going to conclude our survey of halachas that involve Korbon Pesach L'Maaseh. That is how we are supposed to be eating Korbon Pesach. We missed it this year. We didn't have Pesach Sheni, as we explained last week. We're approaching Yom Yerushalayim now. So, God willing, after we finish this little issue with Korbon Pesach, we are going to return to Sefer Avodah. We're going to start, God willing, to Midim Musafim. I'm very excited about it. And we're fast approaching making a siyum on the entire book of Avodah, at which point we're going to, God willing, have a nice party here. We're all invited. Look forward to it. Everybody see the sources? I sent out a PDF version of the source sheet over here. This, we're going to discuss the issue that we found in a few places that, at least let's say you don't have Korbon Pesach on the table. What do they tell you? You have to finish eating the Afikomen by midnight. That's an idea. It's in the classical codes. We're going to see that it's actually, like most things in Judaism, it's quite nuanced. Indeed, you're supposed to finish eating Korbon Pesach by that time. Is it Shurat Hadin that you have to finish eating your Korbon Pesach by midnight? I'd like to point out that in this particular halacha, we did not find it in the Mishnah Torah. We don't find it in the Rif. And usually, if something is not found in the Pesach of the Rif and the Rambam, for example, we have to ask why. We have to ask even, is it 100% bona fide halacha? So let's look through the sources here. This is Maaseh Korbanot. We saw this earlier. It says all these Korbanot. Kol elu hane'achalim layom v'laylo. All these Korbanot are supposed to be eaten the day that they're offered, and then that night, din Torah. That's a Torah law. Shehein ne'achalin ad she'alu ya'aleh amud hashachar. So one could eat them until dawn. Dawn signals the beginning of the morning, the end of the night. That's the line between most mitzvahs. The mitzvah is to do it at night. Alot hashachar is the last time you can do it at night because it starts getting light out. In what sense is it still night? Interesting, no one ever says, I haven't found this, maybe someone could correct me. There's never havamina that these night mitzvahs can be done until the actual sunrise. Dawn, it's already considered, morning. A lot of the mitzvahs of the morning start already with dawn, for example, including prayer and Kriyat Shema, the rest of them. So that's usually the line. And the Rambam points out, in order to keep people from doing an avera, that is neglecting to do the mitzvah, neglecting to eat all this meat and then leaving it over. Remember, you're not supposed to leave over sacrificial meat. And you're definitely, if you have leftover sacrificial meat, you shouldn't eat it. To prevent this from happening, Amru Chachamim she'eino nechalin ad chatzot halayla. So the sages said they're not to be eaten. They're not to be eaten beyond chatzot halayla, which means midnight. Finish eating them by midnight in order to keep people away from doing this. They shouldn't think that, oh, good, I have another 6 hours. Finish by midnight. And then he says in Psulei Muktashim, we didn't see this also. He says, if you have one animal is a firstborn sheep, and it's within its first year, so it's supposed to be given to the Kohen who's supposed to make it to a sacrifice. That's a firstborn animal. And the other sheep is of the same age. It's not a firstborn. It's going to be a Korbon Pesach. They look pretty similar. And one was a Korbon Pesach designated as such, one was the Bechor. They've been mixed up. There was no indication which one's which. No one knows these sheep well enough who can actually go and say, yes, I'm pretty sure this one was the Bechor and this one's the Pesach. So they're going to be slaughtered on Erev Pesach. One is a Korbon Pesach. One is going to be just the Bechor. So they have different rules of who can eat them and how they can be eaten. Rambam says they should be eaten as though they're a Bechor. Okay? Now, when eaten as though a Bechor, what does it mean? It means that you let them develop a blemish because Bechor isn't eaten stam until it actually develops a blemish. That's what he says here. So why don't you just actually bring it to the Korban, to the temple and make a Korban out of it? And be safek. Lama lo yikruvu lefisha Pesach ne'achal l'chol adam ad chatzot. Paschal offering can only be eaten until midnight. The Bechor can be eaten that very day. Let's say it's offered on the 14th of Nisan, and even on the 15th until sunset. But it can only be eaten by Kohanim. So in one sense, the Bechor can be eaten by a limited number of people, has more time to be eaten. Korbon Pesach can be eaten by more people, but has less time to be eaten. We don't want to bring Kachim to become disqualified. You can't say, well, because we have a suffix here, we're just going to apply the Chumrah. These Korbanot can only be eaten in the time allowed for Korban Pesach, the more limited time, and it's only going to be eaten by a group by their Kohanim. Nope, that would mean that once we get to the time for burning the leftover Korban Pesach, we'll also be burning leftover Bechor meat, whichever one it is, and that would not be right because that Bechor meat really isn't disqualified yet. And ve'in ma'atin ba'achilatan. Also, we shouldn't limit how it can be eaten. The Korban Pesach, like you said, can be eaten by everybody. A Bechor only by Kohanim. So if we eat this with all the chumras of a Bechor, we are limiting who can be actually eating it. Only Kohanim are available to eat it. It might not even get eaten. So that's a problem. In Hilchos Korban Pesach, we also see this halacha. This is the topic for today. So too, you're not supposed to eat Korban Pesach until, you have to stop eating it by Passover. He's referring to this. Korban Pesach really could eat it until dawn, but the problem is, that could lead, you could make a mistake there, be a little bit lackadaisical with it, and then the Korban Pesach meat will be left over by the time the sun begins to shine its rays over the horizon, what we call the dawn. So what's going to happen? So we say, you know what? You can't eat it. You can't eat it after midnight. Really, according to Torah law, it can be eaten all night until the dawn. But in this case, the sages said, you know what? You can't eat it after midnight. Okay, be a little bit faster in what you're trying to do. Sorry, that's so big. Okay. He continues. He also says, he also has to mention that Korban Pesach has Hallel and this idea about what happened if people fall asleep while eating it. This Hallel thing we'll get back to soon. So you see from the Rambam that this whole idea that Korban Pesach, deadline for eating the Korban Pesach, or as my father would say, the deadline for eating the Korban Pesach is midnight. Okay. And it seems to be a rabbinic enactment. In the Gemara Megillah, they mention here, this is apparently this is the Mishnah. Davar shemitzvah b'layla kasher kol halayla. That's what the Mishnah said. If you have a mitzvah that is supposed to be done by night, something that's whose mitzvah is at night, so it can be done all night. La tuyemai, what's included in this? Achilas pesachim. Okay. So this tells you could eat Pesach all night. With lo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, which disagrees with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, the Tanya v'achlu et basar b'layazeh. It says in the Brisa, they quote the pasuk that they should eat the meat of the Pesach that night. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, nemar kan b'layazeh v'nemar lalon v'artiv eretz Yisrael b'layazeh. It says concerning eating the Korban Pesach, eat it that night, and it also says concerning the smiting the firstborn that God Himself, so to speak, will pass through the land of Egypt that very night. And when did that happen? That happened actually at midnight. Malan an chatzot, ad kan af chatzot, ad kan ad chatzot. So just like with regards to the firstborn, okay, it was God's presence would be known in Mitzrayim until midnight because they smoked the Egyptians, and then it's done. So too, this is referring to midnight, this eating of the Korban Pesach. So he's basically saying no eating the Korban Pesach until midnight. That's how he understood the verses. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says no eating Korban Pesach after midnight is actually a biblical law, not like the Rambam has, as we marked in blue. So there's a Tosfos over here that we'll begin to see, and there's more Gemara over here. So he says here, La tuya chila psachim udlok Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That's a quote from this Gemara over here in Megillah. Mikol makom nira the halacha k'Rabbi Elazar. The Tosfos says it seems that the halacha follows Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, not the way the Rambam put in Mishnah Torah. Daha ika stama Rabbi Pesachim. It says there's a stam teaching, and that means it's not. It's sort of anonymous, but it seems to be held of. It seems to be the voice of the majority of the sages. What? Dekoi kavate. It holds like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. How does it go? It not. It says there, HaPesach achar chatzot metamei et hayadayim. It says that after chatzot, after midnight, the leftover Passover meat contaminates the hands. What is contamination of the hands? Contamination of the hand means that you're dealing with sacrificial meat that has become disqualified. So the sages ordained that sacrificial meat contaminates the hands. Anytime we talk about contamination in the hands and tilas yadayim and things related, sometimes you have to dunk your hands in a mikveh even. That is always a rabbinic enactment. There is no scriptural source for the washing of the hands as a required action before eating bread or truma or sacrificial meat. It's always a rabbinic enactment. Yes, King David said, "Erchatz min yom kapai v'asofafam is b'chakla Hashem." I'll wash my hands in cleanliness. That is simply pshat. A person needs to clean his hands before davening. But there is no biblical laws regarding Netilas Yadayim. It's always a rabbinic enactment. So the Tosfos are saying, if the sacrificial meat is contaminating one's hands, it must be because the meat has already been officially disqualified at that point, which at that point is midnight. So it must be there's a biblical disqualification kicks in. This isn't such a solid proof, by the way. You could say that just like the contamination of the hands was an enactment of the sages, the actual disqualification at midnight was also an enactment of the sages. But there you go. It says V'chein b'Mishnah be'ezumu koman, in that classic chapter of the Mishnah in Zvachim. Ezumu koman, it seems to imply all this also. Stama b'sof perak kama devrachos, perak daf tes. Gami ma'aseh v'u vanav shel Rabban Gamliel b'beit hamishteh. Remember, right at the beginning of the Mishnah, Rabbi Gamliel told his sons, "Oh, you missed the Zman for Kriyat Shema. Don't worry. Technically speaking, even though the sages said you have until midnight, now is to prevent you from being negligent with the mitzvah. Really, you have until dawn." Okay. Whenever they said Akatzot, it's talking about mitzvahs that you have until dawn. Vilu achila psachim lo katani. He didn't mention achilas psachim as part of one of these examples. It must be because Rabbi Gamliel felt that this fact that you stop eating Korban Pesach, or you have to finish eating the Korban Pesach by midnight, that's an actual biblical law. None of these are rock solid proofs, by the way. When we could look at Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Damar Chatzot, so it must be holds the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who says that you can only eat the Korban Pesach until midnight. So Tosfos says, we're going to see why they say this. That's why you should finish eating your matzah. You should hurry up to eat your matzah on Passover nights before midnight. Even the last bit of matzah. We're not talking about the first eating of the matzah. We're talking about the last thing of matzah that replaces Korban Pesach. Remember, even in times when you don't have a temple, you don't have Korban Pesach, eating the matzah is still a rabbinic, a biblical requirement. It's a biblical obligation. With regards to the halal after eating the Korban Pesach or after eating the matzah, the afikomen, so perhaps you don't have to be so strict with that. After all, the recitation of halal is always a rabbinic requirement, so they wouldn't have made this enactment because you have all night. You know what? Just make sure to do it by midnight. Let's see what Tosfos is talking about there in Zvach. The Mishnah says in Ezahu Makoman that here, every Korbon has the time when it can be eaten. He says here that, for example, the firstborn animal is eaten only by Kohanim. The Ma'aser, that's the tithe animal, that's eaten by everybody. They can be eaten in any part of Jerusalem, at least Jerusalem as it was considered in Second Temple times. Any way they want, means they could cook it any way they want. And they have 2 days and the intervening night, which means basically the day it is offered, and then the following night, the entire night, and then until sundown the next day. But Pesach eno nechal ela balayla, eno nechal ela chatzot. The Pesach is only eaten at night. Further, it means not the day it's offered. Further, it is only eaten until midnight. Eno nechal ela minuyav, and its limitation is not Kohanim. It's eaten only by those who are signed on to eating it, and it can only be eaten sli, as opposed to these other korbanot, which are eaten any way they like. So anytime they describe Pesach here, it could be, you have to compare it to what describes the other korbanot. Why? This is going to be an important point that's going to come out next for those of you who are with us on Pesach. You'll see why. Montana, the Gemara asks, who is the one who holds of this, that you can only eat Korban Pesach until midnight? Amar Rav Yosef, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, it's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he or who, with whichever one. I've seen both versions. As it says, Rabbi Elazar, well, let me correct the color on this one. Why did I shrink that? No, I just want to do, okay. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omar, same drasha we saw before. Okay, the drasha that it can only be eaten until midnight because the spiting of the firstborn happened at midnight. But now we see Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Amar le Rabbi Akiva, this the blue opinion seems to be the the forerunner of the one that we found the Rambam. It said concerning that Korban Pesach in Egypt that they would eat it in haste. Okay, the haste of having to leave Egypt. When did they actually make haste to leave Egypt? In the morning. So that's Shat Chipazon. In came Ma Talmud Lamar Balalazes. So what I mean, eat the Korban Pesach tonight, and you have until daybreak to eat it. You'd think that it could be eaten by day, like most other sacrifices. The day they sacrifice it, they would also eat it while the sun is still shining. Talmud Lamar Balayla. That's what it said. No, you have to eat it. Wait until nighttime. It is eaten at night and not at day. So Abaye says, why are you even saying that this statement in the Mishnah over here that says the Pesach is only eaten until midnight is a deraisa rule? It could be that's bringing what the sages enacted according to Rabbi Akiva, that really you had until dawn, but they want you to make sure to finish it. Don't wait and be a little bit, I guess, lazy about the mitzvah. Make sure to do the mitzvah by midnight. Why are you even saying that this is necessarily, this line left in black, necessarily a biblical rule? Maybe it's a D'Rabbanan rule. The whole point of this rule is to keep you away from doing the Avera of leaving over Korban Pesach. So the response is, Im Kain, my Ella ad chatzot, says, it is not eaten except for until midnight. That's a little bit of a negative language. Kiyasa, mahasam doraisa afkan nami doraisa. Just like any other time we have this type of language, eno ne'achal until, that we had in previous Mishnayos, it's referring to a doraisa rule. As Rashi says, litnei v'ne'achal ad chatzot. If it was a rabbinic rule, it would have said it can be eaten until chatzot. Okay, like in other cases, when we're talking about a positive rule that maybe the sages enacted, make sure to eat ad chatzot. Ne'achal ad chatzot. That's what all would have said. But here it says ve'eno ne'achal ela ad chatzot. The double negative seems to be implying it's talking about a negative rule. This isn't also a rock solid proof to this point. The point is, we do see that Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah held that this rule, Korban Pesach, can only be eaten until midnight, is a rabbinic rule, is a biblical rule, and Rabbi Akiva felt it's only a rabbinic enactment. In Pesachim, we have this Mishnah over here. See, Pesach achar chatzot mitamei ta'adayim. Okay, here it says the Pesach contaminates the hands after midnight because it's disqualified. Disqualified sacrificial meat contaminates the hands. So the Gemara infers must be so mechatzot have leinotar. It must be that once midnight happens, now it's officially leftover. Means it's biblically disqualified at midnight. So they say, who's the source for this? Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, like we have over here. And Rabbi Akiva told him, no, I disagree with that. It seems to be from the biblical verses that really a person had until when? Until morning to eat Korban Pesach. No, that's not the exact right color. Let me make it where the exact shade of blue. Does that match? Okay, that matches. Okay, so you see this idea is mentioned in quite a few Gemaras over here. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah's rule is mentioned in Megillah, and in Zvachim we have it, and we also see Rabbi Akiva's rule, and same thing in Pesachim. We have Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah's rule plus Rabbi Akiva's rejoinder. So there's some conclusion here that the editor put in, interjected into this Gemara. The Gemara continues over here. By the way, this points out, like Rabbi Akiva is saying, and this one, when it says in the Mishnah that a Pesach is only eaten at night, it's not what Tosafos said, was meaning that you have to wait until it's actually nightfall to eat Korban Pesach. What they're trying to say is, and as Rabbi Akiva points out, it means as opposed to other korbanot, which are eaten the very day you offer it as a sacrifice, the Korban Pesach, you actually have to wait until it's the next day. The next day begins at night. Like I was pointing out to the guys in Pesach, it seems to be from other biblical verses and other rules that the Rambam brings after sundown, or even if a person accepts the holiday early, perhaps even then, sometime around Plag, because that's already considered night. And it's only the Korban Pesach, one only has to wait until Tzeis to actually eat it, officially nightfall, if that person was contaminated that day. He's a Tavul Yom. His ritual immersion only makes him ritually pure once the stars come out, once it's really nightfall. So we saw that. So this seems to be the proof to the position. So they continue over here. Little Shakalatariya asking questions. What does Rabbi Akiva hold? Rabbi Elazar, how would they're arguing back and forth. What is this? What are all this teaching? And Rava adds over here. That's why I put this in purple. Omar Rava, achal matzah bizman hazeh achar chatzot. Rava says that if a person were nowadays, when did Rava live? Rava lived in, I think it was 4th century Babylonia. So he's living quite a while after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and his situation was similar to ours. He didn't have Korban Pesach, and he's referring to people in Chutz La'aretz. Nowadays, if a person eats matzah after Chatzot, the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lo yatsa yedei chovato. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, then he will not have discharged his obligation. So make sure to eat the matzah. If you hold like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, at least eat your matzah before midnight. Notice that Rava doesn't say anything regarding Rabbi Akiva. Maybe Rabbi Akiva wouldn't have such an extreme view because Rabbi Akiva says, technically speaking, that a person can eat his, at least deraisa level. He could eat his Korban Pesach after midnight. So he could also eat his matzah. So they say, Pshita, the Kevin eat Kishla Pesach, Pesach dummy. What Rava is saying, it seems to be kind of obvious. Matzah is connected to Korban Pesach, so it should have the same rules of Korban Pesach. You could eat it all night, according to at least the Torah rule. But the sages said, but make sure to eat it before Chatzot. That way you don't come to, miss your opportunity to do the mitzvah or perhaps do an avera. And the Gemara's answer here is Ma'udatema. What would you have said? What was your havamina? Ha'apke krame keshe. Perhaps the verse itself disconnects the matzah from its connection to Pesach. How? Kamash Balan the Kri Ahadre Kra Lemilta Kamaita Hadre. Because it has its own commandment. We would have thought maybe it has its own rules. No, Kamash Balan, it's supposed to be connected. It's connected like it always was connected. And this is a Tosfos we have over here that we're going to see. The Gross says you should read this Tosfos if you want to find the Gross opinion. Let's see what the editor wrote. The Rif and Rambam hold like Rabbi Akiva. Okay? They hold like Rabbi Akiva. Whatever rule we have regarding Korban Pesach until midnight, that's just a rabbinic enactment. The lo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. As lahem ein inyan lechol matzah ad chatzot. We never saw that according to Rabbi Akiva. There's a specific issue to eat the matzah before midnight, and if you don't eat your matzah by that time, maybe you're not, you discharge your obligation. So the question was, perhaps they should, even though the Rif of the Rama holding Rabbi Akiva, maybe Rabbi Akiva would agree that you see even Kriyas Shema, a person has a commandment to read Kriyas Shema, like Rabbi Gamliel said. The sages didn't want you missing your Kriyas Shema and wait, and then miss it. So they said, and they cut off the time of Kriyas Shema in half. Instead of waiting until dawn, now you have only until midnight to do the mitzvah. So why did Rabbi Akiva agree with this, that considering eating Korban Pesach is a mitzvah, even if the mitzvah is all night, so the sages would have logically been consistent and said, please make sure to eat your Korban Pesach by midnight. Why doesn't Rabbi Akiva hold of such a thing? Or why didn't at least the Rif and the Rambam hold of this? So the answers offered are the Pesach yesh iser lahosir. That means Korban Pesach, there's an actual avera. If you leave it over until dawn, it's a sin, and that disqualifies it. Whereas for matzah, ein iser lothir. There's no such prohibition of leftover matzah, as long as you didn't bring it to the table. We do have halacha, anything brought to the table with Korban Pesach becomes like the Korban Pesach, so it has to be destroyed like leftover Korban Pesach. But we're talking about just matzah left off the table. Also, eating the matzah is like Kriyas Shema. Kriyas Shema is completely positive command. There's no isser, don't leave over Kriyas Shema until the next morning. There's no prohibition. It's just a positive commandment to read Kriyas Shema at night. Why? Shelo yavo livshoa ba'achilata shekol hayom chika lamitzvah. We already seen other halachas. A person's supposed to be waiting to do this mitzvah of eating matzah. He's been waiting all day long. He's even starving himself, as the Rambam says. He can't eat matzah all the previous day before. He's supposed to eat a lot less, like we saw at the beginning of our Pesachim, so that he comes to eat matzah l'te'avon when Passover starts. So of course he's not going to miss this mitzvah. Whereas Kriyas Shema, the problem is, we say Kriyas Shema every single day, and we have different schedules. Sometimes we miss our minyan, or we had to go to an early minyan that was early enough to daven Marav, but too early for Kriyas Shema, like we do most Shabbases, and we get busy with things, so we might miss it. Like the Gemara says, a person can even fall asleep, so I'll miss Kriyas Shema. That's a regular mitzvah. Ain't no mishtokek. Okay, he's not itching for Kriyas Shema every single night. Whereas the night of Passover, that's the first thing he has to eat. If he doesn't eat matzah, he ain't eating that entire night, and he wasn't eating the day before. And if he was a bechor and he was fasting, although I've never met a bechor who came to Leil Seder saying, "Can we just hurry this thing up? I've been fasting all day." Never happens. V'chein l'Rambam sov zman kriyata miyad ba'alot hashachar. So too, the Rambam would say that you have to finish saying Kriyat Shema, make sure to get the mitzvah in by dawn, right? That's because that's the end. If you can't say it after dawn, whereas the mitzvah to eat matzah, the mitzvah to eat matzah, technically speaking, according to the Rambam, like you saw, continues all 7 days of Passover. So that's why the Rambam would throw in this rule: make sure to eat your matzah by midnight, because you really have until dawn, and you have to hurry up. Really, you have until 7 days. So there's no reason to make an enactment regarding matzah, which is why the Rambam left this out entirely. What about the Gra's opinion? Did the Gra Vakpada to eat matzah until midnight? So you can ask this question: what about Rabbi Akiva? Did Rabbi Akiva have such a hakpada? So Rabbi Akiva should have said, when it comes to saying Kriyat Shema, it's not to avoid, to distance oneself from doing an Avera, because there's no Avera of missing Kriyat Shema. It's negligence, to avoid the negligence of doing the Bit Laseh. Just like the rest of the mitzvahs. I would expect that Rabbi Akiva and those who follow Rabbi Akiva would say, you know what? Whatever is a mitzvah to do, Leil Pesach, and you have all night to do it, you should do before midnight, not just eating matzah. What about Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim and Moror if it's a Doraisa, and I guess all the rabbinic enactments? Even though we saw an argument, no, rabbinic enactments, that's something else. There's no reason to make an enactment, but let's say the Arba Kosos, they're all connected. Remember, those are very machmir to do all these mitzvos dafka after tzeis. Why? Because they just make a big connection. Even all the kosos and all the mitzvos, they're connected to eating the matzah, so they should have all the chumras of eating the matzah. And we only eat matzah once it's nightfall, so too, you can only start your Arba Kosos before nightfall. So if you're going to say that, so you should basically finish your entire seder before nightfall, based on that logic. Okay, so that's a good question. That's what the Gra's opinion basically is saying. It says at least for the matzah, it makes sense that there would be this hakpada that it should be eaten, even according to Rabbi Akiva and everybody else. Rabbi Akiva would agree that you should finish eating your matzah by chatzot, but it's not so bad if you don't. What is Rava saying? Rava says that if you miss your matzah, if you go past the midnight line, that's it. You can't fulfill the obligation. Rabbi Akiva was saying you could. Yeah, it's lechatchila, but the Rambam didn't mention any of this. Let's see what the Tosfos he's referring to over here, and we'll close with that and the question after we read this. So Amar Rava achal matzah bizman hazeh. Yesh mefarshim dekach halacha da'astam mes nisan kivathei. Tosfos there says, saying that Tosfos here in Megillah also said there are some who say that the halacha follows Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It's a biblical law that you really can't eat Korban Pesach after midnight. Vein zaraya, perhaps it's no proof. It says in the Gemara Megillah, Ashkan stamachrin lo kavatei. We found other teachings that do not follow Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It says, says here, there's a rule that anything as a mitzvah all night long can be done all night. And what was that? This commandment, for example, to eat Korban Pesach. And this doesn't fit Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said. And he continues over here. Let me see if there's a thing over here. We've seen this already. This is the line that the Gra is trying to get here. With regards to Kriyat Shema, like we learned from Rabbi Gamliel's sons coming back from the wedding late, and I'm telling them, you still have time to say Kriyat Shema. Really, the sages told you until midnight they were trying to make sure that you wouldn't do what you've just done. There's a siyag that person shouldn't want to purposely eat his matzah or whatever other mitzvah after midnight. He should make sure to do it beforehand. Okay, if he didn't eat it before chatzot. What I mean, ella. Okay, what is that language? Ein ella ad chatzot. But two, kihanach mahanach deoraita klomar. Remember, this is similar to the teaching we saw before, the inference that it must be that rule in the Mishnah in Ezu Mekoman is saying that the way the Mishnah says it must be referring to a biblical law and not a rabbinic law. Just like those other halachas that Korban Pesach can only be eaten by its registered eaters and can only be eaten roasted. Those are biblical commandments. So this rule also that it can be eaten only can be eaten before midnight must be also be a deraisa. Okay, so this is the point that Vilna Gaon is trying to get at. That it should make sense that with regards to any mitzvah we're dealing with, you have only until midnight to do so, and everybody should agree with that. So let's read the last question that the editor put in here. Lama inyan lakdim et hamasa nimsa rak l'shita Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lo Rabbi Akiva. So why the Rava only mention this idea of make sure to only eat Korban Pesach before midnight? Okay, that's a Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's idea. So he said it's puzzle. You can't eat it after midnight. Should also, and Rabbi Akiva would agree that really l'chadchila you should. We didn't hear anything about Rabbi Akiva. And the answer is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said this regarding Pesach because it will be puzzle after midnight. That's to say, make sure to eat it before midnight. So if you're eating your matzah instead of Korban Pesach, the same rule would be transferred there. Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva, Mishlo Kimen mitzvah is mancha kavu chazal yachol kaima acharkach. Rabbi Akiva would say, with regards to this mitzvah of matzah, Chazal gave it a time, and if he missed it, he could still eat his matzah b'diavad after that time. V'chein l'chol mitzvot shel Leil Seder, and that applies to all the other mitzvahs of Leil Seder, which we mentioned: matzah, maror, drink the 4 cups, sipur, not sipuk yitziat mitzrayim. I'm going to correct this: sipur yitziat mitzrayim, and reciting the Hallel. Rabbi Akiva, he didn't have to say, Rava didn't have to say that Rabbi Akiva says, he didn't have to say such a thing because he was talking about disqualification, biblical disqualifications. And according to the Rambam, Lashitas Rambam Malachak Rabbi Akiva, should be Kir Rabbi Akiva. By the way, that's another line. The Pesach doesn't disqualify, doesn't contaminate one's hands after chatzot. Why? Because it's not nosar at that point. You can still technically eat it. If you didn't eat your Korban Pesach by chatzot, according to the Rambam, you still have until night, until dawn, the end of the night, to do so. So that Mishnah, which says, the Stam Mishnah, it says that contaminates the hands. So that's not a halacha. So let's get to bottom line. What's the halacha regarding achilas matzah? It seems, according to the Rif and the Rambam, that what they tell you sometimes that make sure to eat your Korban Pesach by midnight isn't Ikra Din. Okay? According to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rava, it is, but according to Rabbi Akiva, it is not. And it seems that many hold that way. That's what the Vilna Gaon's implying, that's the real halacha. And the Vilna Gaon's also implying, if you're reading between the lines, that if you say you should make sure to eat your matzah by midnight, so maybe you should do all your mitzvahs by midnight, finish the Seder by midnight. That 4th cup, if you hold that, that the din of the 4th cup is similar to the din of the matzah, so the 4th cup is basically the last part of the Seder. We could do a 5th cup according to the Rambam. The Hallel maybe to Rabbanan, there never was a rule when you have to finish saying Hallel, but certainly that 4th cup and all the other mitzvahs and finishing, telling the story to your children, etc., and your maror or whatever it is, make sure to do also before midnight. And I've never seen that how to put it. Have you ever heard that? People say finish the Seder by midnight. They said that finish the Seder by midnight. Just the Afikomen. But there are Rishonim and Achronim who pointed out, this rule basically implies that if you say this, you make this connection, even according to Rabbi Akiva, then you should make sure to finish all your mitzvahs by midnight, because that's the general rule. If you have a night mitzvah to do, you should finish doing it by midnight. The sages, it's a blanket rule. Rabbi Gamliel said that. That's like at the beginning of Shas. Well, they say this is Mariv, right? When do you have until when do you have to daven Mariv? Not Kriyas Shema, Mariv. You have all night. So when is the last minyan at the Shtiblach? Midnight. Yeah, I remember. I've been there. The Beis Yisrael Shtiblach for the midnight minyan. They have 2:00 in the morning. Okay, I remember at the place they said no minions after midnight. So I remember going there for the last minion. It's a Thursday night type of thing. Okay, so it's a good question. Why is it the people are makpid for eating the matzah before midnight, but the rest of the Seder, Birkas Hamazon, the third cup, they might miss. There are people who sit there, they're eating the Afikomen 5 minutes before midnight. Good job. They got it in. And what about the third cup? What about Birkas Hamazon? Well, you don't have to. Why not? So is matzah all night. Why is matzah until chatzos? Because Shema, l'harchik min aver, according to l'harchik min apshia, according to Rabbi Akiva. At least Rabbi Akiva didn't say it explicitly, but according to Rabbi Gamliel, you have all night to say Kriya Shema. Oh, Chatzal said l'harchik min apshia until midnight. That's a general rule. The Vilna Gaon's pointing out. If that's a general rule for all mitzvahs, then any positive mitzvah you have to do until the end of the night. You have until dawn to do it. So really, you should draw yourself a line until midnight. So yeah, the law should apply to everything. Thank God, and this isn't something that's been a problem. I've never even gotten close or been at a Seder which is close to getting to this point where make sure to eat off the kumin by midnight. I think it would be torture to have to be in such a Seder. Or whatever, to each his own.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.